Okay, are we live? Is this live or is this Memorex? Anybody besides me old enough to even remember that commercial? Welcome, friends, fans, former students, current students, and global followers everywhere for yet another edition on our most excellent new platform on Twitch of the Platavenger channel, where we delve into current events, international intrigue, and just outright topics like NATO tonight in a little bit more detail than you're going to find in any of your standard network news or even your clickable internet news, which tells you even less in today's world. How is it we're in an age of information where everybody knows less and less and less? I don't know, but I'm here to try to solve it and have fun while we do it in what I call the classic long form. Every time I've gotten on the Platavenger Twitch channel here, I have dedicated myself into only talking for a half an hour. This could be the big night. This could be it. Who knows? I might only talk for a half an hour tonight. But so far, I think our shortest time has been about 2.5 hours. So, as always, I try to keep it short and sweet, but at least more educational than just clicking on headlines around the world. And I also want to encourage questioning along the way, which is typically why we end up going for 2 to 3 hours. I should have asked before I already spouted as long as I have, is this coming through loud and clear? Can everybody see me and hear me? Is everything live and happening tonight? And you clicked record over here too, right? Okay. I see Ben C in the house saying, yep, all good. That means I'm just going to go ahead and get to it and do it then. If anybody has any questions, I have my chat room open. To the best of my knowledge, I will try to keep up with it, or as best of my skill set, I will try to keep up with that. But for those of you that know me, you know that I get into it, and so I get passionate, and I'm looking at slides, so I don't always keep up with the chat room. That's what Katie's here for, try to keep me on track, and you can throw in icons or emojis or emotes and yell at me via the chat room, and I'll try to get to your questions as they come in. Ask about anything, anytime, anywhere, including tonight's topic, which is NATO. What the hell is going on with NATO? I've mentioned NATO pretty much every night that I have been podcasting for the last several weeks, and it occurred to me that not a lot of people actually understand this organization. By some of the questions I've gotten, both in class back in the old days and even online here in the new days, a lot of folks are quite confused about what NATO is, and more so about what NATO's future is, which, by the way, all of us were confused about because it's the future. We don't know where it's going. But I find it an intriguing international entity that is the most powerful military organization ever known in human history. There is no doubts about that. That's not fake news. That's not opinion news. That's just facts. It is the most powerful military organization humans have come up with yet. And it somehow is subtly behind the scenes all the time. It actually doesn't do a whole lot that we hear about or know about. But I think the future might change that for NATO. And I think NATO's going to have to modify its current enrollment and its current missions in order to be more prepared for that future, which it now finds itself in. So, having said that as my little intro of why I particularly am fascinated by NATO, hopefully you will become fascinated by NATO by some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you starting now. So, what is this group called NATO? Well, it's been around since 1949, and it is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic Treaty Organization doesn't have anything about defense in that, doesn't say anything about weapons, it doesn't say anything about what it actually is. Back in the day, aka it was the North Atlantic Alliance. So all we really have to go on right from the title is it's somehow geographic. It's got something to do with a map. It's got something to do with location. And the location is front and center in NATO. It's North Atlantic, not South Atlantic, not Pacific, not Indian Ocean, the North Atlantic Ocean. And a bunch of powers that are around the North Atlantic all got together and said, hey, let's join a group. Let's make a group called NATO. implemented officially in April of 1949. Some of the factoids that not many know about, but I always find fascinating, is that while it is overwhelmingly powered by the United States of America, the headquarters of NATO are in Brussels, Belgium. Both the kind of civilian functional headquarters as well as a separate military headquarters. The NATO Secretary General is the civilian chief. So the head of NATO is actually a civilian chief, is always a European. The NATO group gets together on a quite frequent basis, by the way. I think they have weekly meetings for all I know. But they have big buildings and headquarters and things going on in Brussels. And they vote on stuff, and so they have rotating membership that they decide when it's time for a new NATO head. And the NATO civilian head, the actual Secretary General, is always from the European ranks. The Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, that's the military dude, is always American. So right from the get-go, this is giving you some interesting insight into what the NATO organization is all about, even before we get to any more details. Why would this be? Why is this guy always a European and this guy is always a American? And I say guy, could be a lady. They've always been guys so far. We're all about equality. We'll see what the future brings. But this is giving you some insight into the organization right from the get-go. And that is that the Europeans, because America is so powerful, and because America has so much military capacity, the Americans are, right from the get-go with NATO, the Americans have always been very uncomfortable of having any other nationality of people in charge of their troops. So the United States and the Europeans, when they got this all formed up, they said, okay, let's have a bit of a division of labor. You Europeans, or we Europeans, based on your perspective, the Europeans will house everything and the international infrastructure of it and the headquarters and the bureaucratic part. Europe, you're going to be kind of in charge of that. When it comes to the military stuff, the United States is going to kind of be in charge of that because the United States, again, is uncomfortable with a union that would see a French general in charge of U.S. troops in a mission abroad. In fact, doesn't that sound hilarious? It did back then, too. So the concept of allowing, while the Americans were willing to sacrifice a bit of sovereignty in order to join this international military alliance, it wasn't willing to give up sovereignty over control of its citizens, its military citizens, if that makes sense. So anytime NATO has an actual military operation, someone from the United States is always in charge, partly because the United States always puts up a lot of the military humans involved. Other countries do too. Everybody collaborates, okay? Everybody collaborates and puts in money, weapons, people, whatever the mission calls for, everybody contributes, right? But the United States is always going to be in charge of the military, work, heavy lifting on this. Even though there might be troops from 20 other nations involved, the United States will have a head honcho in charge. It makes them feel better that they are in control of the United States troops, as well as everybody else's troops, if that makes sense, okay? Now, some have called NATO just the world's biggest gun club. And quite frankly, that's not terribly wrong to call it that. Here's the other part of this that many folks don't know about. There is no NATO troops. There is no NATO weapons. There is no NATO tanks. There are no NATO planes or trains or automobiles or heavy caliber weapons or missiles or jets. There are no NATO anything. NATO, the organization, owns nothing. Its participating members do. So every single bullet and gun and tank and troop and helmet and jet, all of these things are contributed by the member states. And there's no collective of them anywhere. There's not like there's a warehouse in Belgium that has a bunch of guns in it. Each country is responsible for their stuff. Now, of course, each country probably has an allotment of stuff that is ready to go for NATO if NATO were to call. But it's not stockpiled anywhere. And NATO itself doesn't buy anything. The contributing member states do. And I see we already have a couple of comments in here, so I'll stop right here and say, Juwan Armstrong says, will we also be discussing the rise of SEO and the role it could play in the future? I might touch upon that one. And Styles187 in the house, welcome, Styles. I know who that is. Says the French bring the white flags if needed and the brie cheese. See, there you go. Each country contributes to NATO according to their specialties, let's say. By the way, some countries just contribute money. I believe Luxembourg is a member of NATO, and Luxembourg don't really got a lot of firepower. So they are a contributing member in monetary means only. Other countries might contribute more troops than they do money. Other countries might contribute more weaponry than they do troops or money. Or usually it's a combination of things that they all agree on, well, you're going to contribute this much. By the way, if we get to the last slides of this presentation tonight, it will come up that Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, has said, hey, everybody needs to contribute more. And that's why NATO has been in the news a lot more since 2016. Having said that, what is NATO's mission? Again, for those that are skilled in the international set of knowledge, this is old hat for you. You're like, well, of course I know what NATO's mission is. Well, okay, and how did we get this mission? We're going to talk about this in some detail here, hopefully, if everybody's amenable to that. So back in March of 1947, the Treaty of Dunkirk was actually what kind of started this off. I'll bet there's some NATO aficionados who might not even know that little bits of trivia. So it was actually a treaty between France and the UK back in 47 that basically was a, hey, let's get together, let's build an alliance and a mutual assistance in the event of a possible attack by Germany or the Soviet Union. Remember, we see this in the hindsight of history, 60, 70 years later, and we're like, well, why the hell would they care back in 1947? The Germans lost. The Third Reich was crushed, and the Soviet Union was their friend. But it's the political realities of the time. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. There could be some crazy offshoot of Nazis hidden out in Finland that are going to attack that eluded detection or capture, or there could be a re-rise of a fascist group somewhere in Austria. So very early on, after the horrors of World War II were still quite fresh in the European mind, the Brits and the French said, hey, let's go ahead and sign a pact that if anybody does anything in the near future, that we'll come to each other's aid. Very quickly, and by quickly I mean within the year, the Benelux countries signed on to that. That's Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. I love saying that, Benelux, B-E-N-E-L-U-X. Benelux. 3 little countries. So that's up to 5. And then by the next year, by 1949, is when it becomes kind of legitimate, when the United States and Canada, the United States had already been involved in this, saying, hey, we're looking out for the future of Europe, and we're seeing the rise of communist Russia, the USSR, which is back on its feet, and it's making some aggressive moves we're worried about. So the United States already started to encourage this, saying, hey, by the way, we want to join your little club, and maybe let's take the club up to the next notch. And in 1949, they added to the already existing 5, the United States, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. What's that, like an even dozen, something like that? And the common cause for all of this was to safeguard, this is quotes from the NATO website, safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of its members by promoting stability and the well-being in the North Atlantic area. I like that. We might come back to that. I think I've forgotten to stick it back into the presentation at the end, but to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization. I've said that twice now. You all know me. If I've said something twice, it's meaningful, because I believe this is going to come back up in the modern era. And I think NATO's talking about it right now today of should we expand our mission and expand our membership? And if so, who would we add to safeguard freedom that would share our common heritage and civilization? I'm planting that seed. Think about that. We'll come back to it. Let's see. Woogie Boogie's in the house. What's up, Woogie? Says Iceland is in NATO and have no standing army. There you go. So Iceland does not contribute any troops. They contribute money, and they're a staging area. So there are other countries' troops stationed there, as well as some military capacity. Probably the United States has a lot of stuff there. Let's see. Where do we go to? Okay. Now, the real deal, if you want to understand NATO at all, and Stiles has already pointed it out here, Stiles has added in, keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, the Germans down. That's a quote that Ken is saying from NATO's first Secretary General, Lord Hastings Lionel Ismay. Oh, Hastings. But the real deal about NATO, its real teeth, the only thing that matters about NATO is the 5. And everybody's ever taken my class, you already know the 5. The 5, the all-important 5. 4 won't do. 6 is too many. 5 is where it's at. And it's NATO's Article 5. NATO has a big constitution and the big bureaucracy and all these rules and regulations. All of that don't mean diddly squat. The only thing that matters is Article 5. And Article 5 of its constitution says that it is a system of collective defense whereby its independent member states agree to mutual defense in response to an attack by any external party. What's that mean? It means everyone who's in the club 100% agrees that an attack on any member state of NATO, by any outsider, is considered an attack by all member states of NATO and will be dealt with accordingly. Let me break it down even more real for you. If you're in NATO, every single member of NATO has to agree to this, otherwise you're not in NATO. If you're in NATO, if somebody attacks Luxembourg and Luxembourg invokes Article 5, then the U.S. has to consider it an attack on U.S. soil. The Greeks have to consider it an attack on Greek soil. The British have to consider it an attack on British soil. The French have to consider it an attack on French soil, and they surrender. Boom! I had to throw that in there for you, Ken. I knew you were going to beat me to it anyway. So that is some real deal shizzle there, my friends. And it's one of the reasons why I say, frequently say in class, and just talking about the wider world, NATO is the most powerful military organization on planet Earth, and it's the biggest one that the Earth has ever seen. And it's way more powerful than anything else out there because of that Article 5. Because Article 5 gives it teeth. See, the United Nations is a nice entity. I like the United Nations. Many people like the United Nations. We're like, well, why don't we all pass laws and so we can make the world a better place? The problem with the United Nations is it has no teeth. Okay, the problem with many international organizations, they have no teeth. And what that means is there's nothing binding. So in the United Nations, anybody can say anything they want. People can pass all the laws they want, but there's no international police force that makes the world pay attention to those laws. Does that make sense? With NATO, the teeth is Article 5, and everybody is a member of it, and everybody has agreed to it, and that makes it exceptionally powerful. Because again, you think about that. China's going to invade Luxembourg because why wouldn't it? Of course it could take it. Or Russia. The real threat back in the day was always Russia. Russia could easily pick off Estonia right now. Easily. But they're not going to. Because Article 5 says if Russia messes with Estonia, all other 30 member states have dedicated to attack Russia in return. To defend Estonia in return. That is some powerful, powerful stuff. Now, the OG, original gangster NATO, I've now pointed out about a dozen nations that started up just after 1949. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I had it in the last slide, but from the original 12, it's up to 30 now. So there's 30 states. So if Estonia gets attacked, 30 countries, well, 29 other countries, will come to its mutual defense against any adversary. I should also point out that maybe we'll get to this in statistics later as well, but it's something on the order of all military expenditures worldwide, 70% of them are in NATO countries. Wow. Just think about that. It's a lot of money. And also, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but there's at least 3 nuclear powers in NATO: United States, France, and UK. So NATO controls over half the world's nuclear arsenal. That's scary. That's powerful. You start to look at aircraft carriers, big weaponry. The United States already possesses more aircraft carriers than the whole rest of the world put together. So you're looking at a significant power on planet Earth that has a collective defensive strategy that makes it scary for any outside country, one would think, to mess with it. It's one of the reasons why the Cold War stayed cold. It's one of the reasons why NATO may expand to perhaps rein in China's power. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me get back on track here to the original OG NATO. And again, North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, those countries surrounding the North Atlantic, or a lot of them anyway. And 30 states strong now, combined military. Oh, see, I was only one slide off. How did I forget where my next slide was? 30 states now, combined military spending of NATO constitutes 70% of global total. Now, I've pointed out over half the world's nuclear arsenal, maybe way more than half, at least half. And again, you're speaking of with a collective voice. So if somebody attacks Estonia, you have half the world's nuclear arsenal at your disposal to go protect Estonia. Damn. Is anybody going to mess with Estonia? I'm not going to mess with Estonia. I mean, maybe Russia might eventually mess with Estonia, but they haven't so far. So how did this hugely important, most powerful entity in human history come to pass? How was it formed? Where did it come from? Again, maybe some easy questions that most of you already know the answers to, but I always like to take a little stroll down history lane so that you understand where it came from in a deeper sense, so that you understand its current issues and perhaps where it's going in the future. Now, I've done lots of lectures on, every region of the world, but when it comes to understanding modern Eurasia, when it comes to understanding modern Europe versus Western Europe versus Eastern Europe, maybe there's going to be a Southern Europe versus Northern Europe soon, versus Russia. All of these entities all are neighbors of each other, but there's old school global competitions that are at the basis for understanding all of European history for the last 1,000 years. I mean, hell, you go back 2,000 years. Let's just call it the last 1,000 years. Certainly the last 100. It's something about that these were a bunch of powers that ended up taking over major other parts of planet Earth. So the Europeans, for a lot of other history I won't get into, end up about 100, 150 years ago, basically being a handful of powers that controlled all of planet Earth. You know some of these powers. The British had an empire that spanned the world. The French did too. The Dutch even had an empire that spanned the world. The Dutch? Yeah, the Dutch. They controlled Indonesia at one point. The Portuguese controlled Brazil and huge other chunks of change around planet Earth. So you have this tiny group of countries which have global reach and as such are competitive with each other and pulling in tons of money from their colonies and enriching themselves and building up bigger and bigger technologies, bigger and bigger economies, and bigger militaries. So by the end of the day, and here's my fast forward through European history, we can go almost exactly 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago now if we're talking World War I. And what you have is a handful, literally a handful of entities that really control not just big chunks of Europe, but big chunks of the rest of the planet. And they're coming into friction with each other over territories within Europe and territories in other parts of the planet. I should say coming into friction with each other. They already had been bustling up against each other. I mean, Europe, all of European history is basically a series of wars of different groups of people beating the hell out of each other. But I'm just taking it from 100 years ago. So leading up to World War, and this is Europe in 1914, you really had just a handful of major powers. France, the UK, obviously the German Empire, was recently united into something we called a German Empire. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire, which was quite big back in its day, but you haven't heard anything about that since Franz Ferdinand. And I am talking about the band. And the Russians, of course, had a huge territorial empire, but were technologically, militarily behind. And I have Turkey circled on this map too, but of course, Turkey back in the day was the Ottoman Empire, another big empire that controlled not just modern-day Turkey, but parts of the European continent going into what's now Bulgaria and Hungary and Romania, as well as big parts of the Middle East. So you had a handful of entities competing with each other, coming into the modern age with modern technologies, especially modern military technologies. And add to that, as I suggested, a recently unified Germany, which starts to overreach and overreach quickly. I know you all think of, the Germany, like the Third Reich. No, this was the Second Reich. This is the first time that there was a unified Germany. It was a bunch of Anglo-Saxon states up to this point. But under Wilhelm, he united the whole thing, and it became a powerhouse, and quickly became a powerhouse, with territorial ambitions beyond its own unified state. So this, one of my favorite newspaper articles from The Onion. This is not real. If anybody doesn't know what The Onion is, it's a not real newspaper. And they, at one point, came out with something called Our Dumb Century, where they had headlines, pretend fake headlines from every year for the last 100 years. And this is their one for World War I, which I find fascinating. Because World War I essentially started because of these competing powers. And all of the competing powers had different relationships and pacts, defense pacts, with different groups of people. So like the British would say, hey, Germany, if you're attacked, we'll come help you. And the Germans said, hey, Austro-Hungarians, if you're attacked, we'll come help you. And then France is like, well, we don't like the British, so Russia, if anybody attacks you, we'll come and help you. I'm just making these up. I don't have any idea, because no one did, even back in the day. So when World War I actually did break out, everybody was like, I think we all are at war because of this dude called Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, so war! Everyone, you're at war. Well, I'm at war with you, and you're at war, and there's my friend over there, so he's at war with us too. And you're like, oh my God. So, yeah, that's World War I in a nutshell. All right, and Russia was pulled into it, because Russia was not smart. Russia got pulled into World War I against its will because of one of these defense pacts, and had to bail out early because they were going to do this little thing called the Russian Revolution. So they had trouble at home with these Trotskys and Lenins and Stalins that were running around trying to take over the country. So Russia was losing World War I badly to the Germans. But then Germany got ganged up on by everybody else and lost World War I as well, which leads up to different territories, all of the empires kind of being either completely broken down or gaining territory and then losing territory. So by the end of it, Russia had backed out of it early and said, we're getting out of the war. We have other things to do. So we're just going to cede all this territory we've lost. And this little one map here is showing you Russian losses and withdrawal by 1917. You see what's now Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, parts of Poland, even the Ukraine. The Russians just walked away from it and said, we give up, we can't do it. But, by the end of World War I, the Germans also lost. So they gained all this stuff, but then they lost. So they lost all that, and then they lost some other territories that they had previously owned. And the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire got totally wiped off the map. So what you had at the end of the day, here's my original map from 1914, when you're looking at just the end of World War II, a mere 6 to 8 years later, watch the map. So you go from 5 or 6 major empires to this. And what you see lit up here is, there's a whole bunch of states that I now recognize. Oh, there's Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. Oh, there's Czechoslovakia, a state which doesn't even exist anymore. There's Poland, Hungary, Romania. Oh, so this is the map of Europe, and everything's fine now, right? This is when Eastern Europe appears in the modern world, by the way. Some of these states were independent, say, 500 years ago, but in coming into the modern era, they were parts of these bigger empires. And when all these empires beat each other up so badly in World War I and kind of dissolve, it allows for a place like Poland to reassert its independence. Oh, okay, we're going to be free again. We're Poland now. We're not part of any other state. So Russia lost World War I, and then it started to have its commie revolution. Then Germany lost World War I. Then Eastern Europe was then born, right? So everybody's happy and everything's okay. Oh, hell no. Basically, I'm telling the story in a certain way. I'm leaving out all the blood and gore on the Western Front in France and Germany because I want you to understand that Russia was none too happy about its territorial losses in World War I. The Germans even less so. So both of these entities that came out big losers, you don't hear anything about the Austro-Hungarians. They just went away. But Germany and Russia still were central kind of civilizations and still had powerful economies and militaries. And so they basically wanted to get their shit back. And even as early as, the early 1920s, both of these entities were plotting on how to get their stuff back. One, of course, leads to the rise of Hitler. Okay, so Hitler under the Third Reich, the third major evolution or period of high point of German history, they wanted their stuff back so bad that badassery ensues. Because, of course, World War I was so nice, the Germans wanted to do it twice. And Adolf comes to rise between the wars, spouting everything about, hey, we need to get our stuff back, and we weren't treated that well. I mean, that's how he started his whole platform, by the way, if you don't know how Hitler came to power. He had a lot of people's ears. He was saying, hey, we got screwed. These punitive payments we had to make after World War I have bankrupted the German economy, and we need to reunify our state. And of course, he adds on the whole racist part of make it ethnically pure. But this is how he originally gained a voice, was people so angry, humiliated, and pissed off about World War I that they were willing to follow this bozo into World War II. Now, of course, we know how this story ends, and I don't have to waste a lot of time talking about World War II history. The Germans, under Hitler's Third Reich, end up taking over big parts of Europe, getting back way more than they lost, and they then tried to take over the rest of the world. And therefore, the world has to step in and say, hey, dudes, so that's not going to happen. And this is what brought the United States into the war with the United Kingdom, and France was around there doing something, but also with the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union wanted their stuff back too. So you have the trifecta of major world powers fighting against the Nazis: Soviet Union, United States, and Great Britain. And of course, scissors beats paper by the end of the war, and the Allied powers destroy the entire Third Reich. Okay. Oh, and of course, what were the French doing? What would the French do? I love this. I used to share this back in class like 20 years ago. This is a Swiss Army knife compared to the French Army knife. You've got to love that. The corkscrew and the white flag. I'm sorry to my French friends. It's just too hilarious.
The brie knife, too.
I know it's a brie knife. Oh, yeah. What are they going to do with the brie? Ken would add it in a brie knife on top of that one. Okay, so originally, Germany and the USSR, this is at the beginning of World War II, signed a Pact of Non-Aggression. Okay, back in 1939, these two fun-loving guys got together and said, hey, Adolf said, hey, Stalin, I'm going to take over all the rest of the world except this part over here. And Stalin said, that's cool. We'll take over everything else from our side, and we won't attack each other. That was the Pact of Non-Aggression they signed. Luckily, Hitler turned out to be a complete dumbass and reneged on that offer with Joseph Stalin halfway through the war and attacked Russia anyway. Attacked the Soviet Union anyway, which is why Soviet Union ends up fighting for the good guys in the Allied powers in World War II. Now, that's, again, an extremely abbreviated history of World War II, actually World War I and World War II, but I think we've gotten somewhere because now you understand how it got perpetuated, and I hope you understand that there was a bit of mistrust in the air by the end of World War II. Remember, Stalin originally signed a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. He only joined the good guys crew because Hitler turned around and attacked him anyway. And Hitler appeared to be taking over the Soviet Union. But like many other conquerors before him, including Napoleon, they found out trying to invade Russia in winter just doesn't work out. It doesn't work out for anybody. And as a side note, Stalin's Soviet Union did a hell of a lot of heavy lifting in World War II, killing Nazis over on the Eastern Front. We live in America. Most of you, I believe, are Americans or educated in America. And so we hear virtually everything about World War II from an American perspective, and mostly focused on America's role in World War II. It's often overlooked that the Soviet Union actually did a hell of a lot to help win World War II by keeping the Eastern Front not just active and alive, but really killing a lot of Germans. Without the opening of the Eastern Front, the United States would have lost who knows how many more hundreds of thousands of folks, and how much longer the war would have went on. So the Soviet value in World War II cannot be underestimated. And that's why I always try to bring it up. But at the end of World War II, the Allies meet. The Soviets swing in from the east. The United States and the Brits and a few Frenchies swing in from the west. And they all a high five in the middle of Europe. And that's why you see this famous Malta Conference signatory thing at the end of World War II between the leaders of the three main states involved in fighting the Nazis. Okay, but immediately afterward, the Iron Curtain falls, and this is because of the mistrust that was already there before World War II even started. The Soviets only got involved in World War II kind of against their will. They were already they had signed that non-aggression pact with Germany because they basically just wanted their stuff back, and they were going to get it. Originally, Hitler said, yeah, you guys can have Estonia and Latvia and Poland back. Take it. You know what? Let's just cut the stuff in half. You take that half and we'll take the rest. So that was Russia's primary motivation to do the non-aggression pact and to even get involved in the war when Hitler reneged on that. So from the Western perspective, it's like, okay. So all these Soviet troops are now in Eastern Europe, and they've taken over areas that used to be Russia that Russia lost back in World War I. So we're not sure. Are these guys going to stop? Or are they going to keep rolling through the rest of Western Europe and basically just pick up where the Nazis left off and try for world domination? And that's why we have the situation unfold as it does and why NATO was born. And we're getting to that now. Okay. So in a way, Russia did get all of its shit back because it did reclaim those Eastern European territories it lost. And not so much for Germany, though. I love this series of slides. If you look at this series of slides, starting in 1914 again, we're back in 1914 with a handful of powers. 1919, you see a bunch of states pop up in a place we now call Eastern Europe. But by 1945, some of those states have gone away. Let me go back again. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I hate when it does that. I guess that's why you do separate slides. So check out 1914, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then watch Poland. Just watch Poland as an entity. It moves, okay? So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania just go away. They get reabsorbed back into the Soviet Empire, as does Ukraine, which had a fleeting few years of independence. And of course, at the end of World War II, all of these other states that are still legitimately states, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, they remain as sovereign states, but not really. The Soviet Union pretty much put puppet governments up in charge of these states. So while on paper they looked like states, and they had seats at the United Nations, which was just formed up in 1946, everybody understood that this was all, they were all controlled. They were what's called puppet states. All of these were Soviet puppet states, all the way over to East Germany, which now is back to being part of Germany, but it was a separate state back in the day. So that's why we had this thing called the Cold War Standoff. Very quickly after World War II, both sides mistrusted each other. And by the way, I gave short shrift to the Soviet side. Wait, say that 10 times fast. And the short shrift I've given to the Soviet side is that a lot of things that happened during World War II, before World War II, during World War II and just after World War II actually made the Soviets mistrust America quite a bit too. I won't get into a long laundry list here, but there were several particular incidents that things had been agreed upon that the West reneged on. And namely, there was some communist parties happening down in Greece that were crushed by Western folks, and that really displeased Stalin. And a few other things about some territories that were reneged on. And then, of course, this thing called NATO is getting ready to crop up, which is going to cement the distrust between the two entities. So this Cold War is that whole commies versus the West that happened for the greater part of the 20th century. And this just shows it all nice on a map right here. Okay, and it was in this cauldron of mistrust that Soviet intentions that NATO was born, because the Soviet Union didn't officially pull all of its troops out of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, and all of us knew that there were puppet governments installed, and there were those people in Ukraine and Estonia and Latvia going, "Hey, what the hell happened to us? We used to be a state, and we're gone. We're back into just got absorbed back into the Soviet Russia." So lots of folks were saying, hey, this is scary, and it looks like these guys are going to continue to roll on throughout the rest of Europe and take over everything. And into that, the OG NATO was born. This collective agreement was pretty much, while I've now gone over it technically and showed you lots of words on the first couple slides, saying we're doing this, we're going to protect our common cultures and civilization, and it's a collective defense strategy. The reality is that, yes, it was born during this era where all these states were very worried that a much empowered and giant Soviet Union was going to swallow up the rest of Eastern Europe outright and then proceed to swallowing up the rest of Western Europe. The Cold War, it's really hard for us younger people, and by us, I mean you all. It's hard for people who were born after the Cold War ended to understand the true angst, some would say outright fear, that the Western nations had that the Soviet Union was going to literally take over the world. Remember from previous lectures, if you chimed into our China lectures, that in 1949, China became unified after a civil war and became communist China. So from the outside world perspective, this is all happening at the same time. Remember, NATO was formed in 1949. Same year China became communist. So the Western states were looking at what's happening in the world and saying, wow, there's this huge communist axis that's cropped up, and communism was an ideology that they outright said, this is an ideology that we want the whole world to embrace. We want all other states to have a communist revolution and become communists like us, and we're going to encourage that. The Team West said, well, we're democracies, and we believe in capitalism, and so we're going to form up our team, and we're going to do everything we can to promote our ideology to the rest of the world. That's what the whole Cold War is all about. The thing is, if the United States was located directly beside the Great Soviet Union, you might not have had a NATO, because if the United States could transplant itself over the European continent, it would share a border with Soviet Russia, and it would be obvious that if either side attacks each other, they're the most powerful militaries on planet Earth with now newfound nuclear weapons, or atomic weapons, I should say. Everybody knows if the U.S. and United States attack, if the U.S. and Soviet Union attack each other, it is full-on global war, which will end badly for everybody. And if they were next door neighbors, that might have been that. It might have just been a Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. But the United States is located on the other side of the Atlantic, and there's lots of small states in Europe. By comparison to Russia and the United States, all European states are small. But you have small states like Germany. I mean, it's big, but it's not U.S. big. In the UK and France, then you have Luxembourg and Belgium, and of course the Soviet Union could roll over Belgium. So that's why they thought to have a collective security agreement. This was even better. than the United States having to be right next door to Soviet Russia. It basically said, hey, we're under a protective umbrella, and so guess what, Soviet Union? You might as well pretend that you border the United States, because if you attack Germany, if you attack France, if you attack Luxembourg, it's the same as attacking the United States. That's what it was all about, okay? Now, in retribution's not the right word. In a counter move, the great Soviet Union said, oh, yeah, well, if you guys have a club that's about security or a collective defensive posturing, we're going to have a club too, because you're the scary ones. We're not the scary ones. You're the scary ones. Because look, Napoleon invaded us one time, and the Hitler guy invaded us one time. So you're the protagonist here. We're the good guys. Take that for whatever you like. However, they said, we're also going to do the same thing. So we started a Warsaw Pact. And all of the countries lit up in red here were the Warsaw Pact countries, which basically just stole the entire constitution of NATO, except it was Soviet Union backed along with these other states. Again, in hindsight of history, most of us would say, well, no, the NATO or the United States has no aspirations of taking over Romania. I know, as savory as that sounds, there was no goal or no mission for the United States to do that. Whereas it appeared very openly that the Soviet Union did have those territorial ambitions, because they did take over these other states in Eastern Europe. So that's why you have this face-off that occurred in Europe. The Iron Curtain falls between these. Warsaw Pact was the counter for NATO. I love finding old vintage maps. This is from like a 1950 atlas. Maybe it's a 1970 atlas in the Census Department of this great map somebody made. Some great cartographer sat down and creatively did this, showing the two sides, the NATO side versus the Warsaw Pact side, brilliantly lit up on the globe there. Now, end of story, so we can get back to finishing up NATO's present and future. End of story here is, you already know the Soviet Union ain't going to make it. Great Soviet Union does not do so well over time, and starting in 1989, for various reasons I'll get into in a separate lecture, all on Russia if you like, the Berlin Wall starts to collapse. The Berlin Wall is symbolic of the Iron Curtain in general, which starts to collapse, and the Iron Curtain is also symbolic for the Soviet Union, which starts to collapse. And so, of course, great Soviet Union ends up collapsing as well. All of these states that you see highlighted here used to be part of Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had to walk back from even controlling the puppet state. So it first lost Poland and Czechoslovakia. It said, you know what, you guys go your own way. You've been pseudo-sovereign states already. You're actually going to be sovereign states now. If you want to vote to kick out communism out of your states, do it. And all of them did immediately. So they became free. And then Soviet Union in 1991 votes to dissolve itself. So Soviet Union goes away and creates 15 new sovereign states, with Russia being the remnant. So Russia is a state, and 14 other states cropped up when Soviet Union collapses officially, leaving Russia, Mother Russia, all alone. Sad Soviet tears trickle down my cheek. Glasnost perestroika. So, mission accomplished for NATO without firing a shot. It's one of the reasons why the Cold War stayed cold, my friend. It's NATO. Because there was so much overwhelming force on both sides that both sides knew you couldn't have a hot war, because everyone on planet Earth would die during an actual hot war with all the military armament that was on both sides. So mission accomplished, and obviously NATO was needed no more. I do love this little graphic here that shows you Soviet Union and its puppet states, 1949 and 1989, and then a whopping 2 years later, the retraction of just Russia and all those territories it lost, and Eastern Europe is reborn once again. So, mission accomplished. Obviously, no more NATO. So this lecture is now over because NATO disbanded just after Soviet Union collapsed. No, it did not. In fact, it did no such thing. And that's one of the more fascinating things about NATO that people aren't paying attention to. They were just getting started. Here's a great piece of trivia for you. Maybe you'll get on Jeopardy someday. Name me all the times Article 5 was invoked during the Cold War. I'm going to say it again. How many times was Article 5 invoked during the Cold War? How many times did NATO actually do something during the Cold War? I think maybe because of the sarcastic tone I'm putting out, you know the answer, because the answer's none. They never enacted Article 5. NATO was never called upon to duty during the entire Cold War. It actually didn't even do a damn thing until the Soviet Union collapsed and went away. And the raison d'etre of it being alive, the raison d'etre, the reason of existence of NATO, was the Soviet threat. And NATO didn't do anything until that Soviet threat had already completely gone away. So this is just a list of actual actions, and this map is of current and past NATO missions. And I've just highlighted a handful of actual missions that NATO has done. Its first kind of true military involvement was in 1992 during the Bosnian War. And even that was not an Article 5 declaration. It was the United Nations had decided, hey, there's potential genocide occurring in this Bosnian War, and we need help setting up a no-fly zone to protect civilians. And who the hell's going to do it? The civilians who were getting massacred couldn't do it. So the United Nations Security Council actually asked NATO if they would do it. NATO said, yeah, sure. We got guns. We got battleships. We got jets. So they set up a no-fly zone and actually shot down a bunch of Serbian jets and stuff. Following on with, and by the way, if you don't know anything about the Bosnian War, that's cool. It'll be another podcast if you like. But this is the Disintegration of Yugoslavia, which followed shortly after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So as Yugoslavia is falling apart into, 5, 6, 7 different member states now in today's world, there was competition for who would control what. And some of these got nasty, and some of the bigger genocides of the 20th century occurred in these areas. I should say most recent, not biggest. So Bosnian War rolls into Operation Deliberate Force in 1995 to stop more Serbian aggression, which rolls into, this is all in former Yugoslavia, in 1999 is perhaps the most famous one, when the NATO forces were used to absolutely bomb Serbian forces into oblivion in order to protect Kosovo, a little sub-enclave of what was then Serbia. So all of that, all this stuff in the Balkan Peninsula, no one ever declared that a NATO country had been attacked. It was, most of it was asked by the United Nations to, hey, can you help us stop a genocide? And they said, sure. It wasn't until 2001, and that would have been 9/11, 2001, when Osama bin Laden and his crew of miscreants attacked the United States, the Pentagon, and World Trade Center. And then President George Bush, I think day of or day after, it was quick. The United States went to NATO quickly after 9/11 and declared Article 5. And here's another trivia when you get on Jeopardy. That was the first time Article 5 had ever been invoked in NATO history. So 1949 to 2001. 2001 is the actual only time it was invoked. People sat around a table and they said, we agree. We agree, United States, you have been attacked, and Article 5 declares all of us must come to your disposal, and all of us will come to your disposal. Who the hell do we go blow up? And that's, sorry, I make light of it. There's been nothing but death and destruction for, almost 20 years of the Afghanistan campaign. Can you believe it, kids? It's been almost 20 years. Next year, I'll cap it at 20. We got involved back in 2001. And by the way, again, another trivia question. The Afghanistan War is a NATO war. It is not a U.S. war. Again, the United States has done 99% of the heavy lifting. But it was first and foremost a NATO war, and NATO troops from various countries were contributed, as well as armaments, to the war to rout out the Taliban and Osama bin Laden out of Afghanistan and shut down the theater of terrorism which was emanating from there. That was a NATO war, and I assume it still is. Actually, I guess I should have looked that up, but I assume it still is, although I dare say there's only U.S. forces there anymore, but I'm not even going to swear to that. The other highlights that I wanted to throw up here that I just thought were fascinating was 2009 is when this thing called Operation Ocean Shield started. And again, maybe this is too far remote in the past for you youngsters to remember, but it was all about Somali pirates. Boy, they were a hot topic back in the day. Pirates? What? Yeah, we had pirates around the Horn of Africa and into shipping lanes going into the Middle East. They were doing some significant damage. And in fact, I think there was a movie with Tom Hanks. What's that called? Captain Ron? Somebody in the chat room, go look up. What's the movie starring Tom Hanks where he's on, or he gets taken over, his ship gets taken over by Somali pirates? Is it Captain Ron, or is Captain Ron a comedy with Kurt Russell? I could be confused. Captain Phillips. And it's called Captain Phillips is the name of the movie. Then Captain Ron is a spoofy 1980s campy comedy starring Kurt Russell. Somebody go check me on that. All right. Anyway, Operation Ocean Shield was NATO forces patrolling the waters off of the coast of Africa into the Middle East in order to stop basically criminal activity. And I really want to put an asterisk beside that one because that's quite important. What the hell does that got to do with Article 5? Nothing. I mean, even the operations in the Balkan Peninsula are questionable, but at least NATO was invited and asked to help out with that. And it could be interpreted by NATO as, well, we should go help out. Otherwise, perhaps another world war is going to start in this area. Because fancy that. What if somebody just got shot in the Balkan Peninsula and caused a war? That's crazy, right? Oh, wait a minute. That actually happened. So there was at least some reason, some calculated logic behind NATO getting involved in the Balkan situation. And then on 9/11, Article 5 was invoked and everybody agreed. But patrolling the ocean? That one is a stretch. And I put an asterisk beside that because I think it's a portending mission creep or mission change for NATO, that they are going in another direction. And I think they're starting to go in another direction big time right now in today's world, but it really starts back in 2009 with NATO ends up patrolling sea lanes in order to establish security to open up shipping for safe shipping between countries, none of which were NATO countries. So interesting mission shift there. And then most of us have already long since forgotten that it was actually NATO that went in and bombed the hell out of Libya at one point. That helped. It was one of the catalysts that helped throw Muammar Gaddafi from power. So, again, how did that did Libya attack a NATO country? No. Did the UN ask NATO to go bomb Libya? No. So you're like, okay, well, now you've got them on almost portraying a leadership role of just Team West in general. So something was happening in Libya. The Western team didn't like it. And I say Western team like it's a throwback to the Cold War, Team West. And so a lot of Western countries didn't like what was going on in Libya, and somehow NATO ends up as an expeditionary bombing force. So now you've got a more mission creep and more mission change of like, oh, well, is NATO just becoming an army for Team West? It seems like maybe we're heading in that direction. Oh, do I have some questions? I'm sorry. Archduke, formerly Franz. Oh, what a great name. Great name. Archduke. I gotta get you one of these just for that name badge alone. Archduke says, Captain Phillips, thank you. I like Juan Armstrong says, perfect for wine and surrendering. I'm assuming that was the French pocket knife. Let's see. Captain Phillips. Callisto Malfoy says, fact checked. You are correct about Captain Ron. Boom. I had, anything to pull Kurt Russell into the conversation will work. Martin Short was in it. I think Goldie Hawn was in it. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, are they married? I think they're married. I know they were in a movie also called Overboard. This has nothing to do with NATO. Let me get back to the comment. Styles. My good friend Styles says, in Afghanistan, each nation's actions were somewhat limited by home laws. Germans could only support police training in the north. Boom. There you go. So all members did agree to Article 5, though. So that was the important part. And all countries put forth whatever contribution they wanted to any conflict or conflagration. That's just the way that NATO works in general. And it's the way that it worked in Afghanistan for the first time ever. Again, there had been other joint missions with NATO, but this is the first time it's like, no, everybody has to do this. Even back in the Balkan situation, I remember some countries going, well, we don't agree with this, and we're not, Luxembourg's not going to put forward troops for this. And NATO would be like, well, okay, because we didn't really have a big discussion about it. But when Article 5 is invoked, everybody's got to be in. So Luxembourg, you're ponying up some money. Germany, you're going to pony up some police training. Somebody's going to pony up some weapons. And, of course, the United States is going to do most of the heavy lifting. By the way, I should also stress, or not even stress, outline, because I've outlined this now 3 or 4 times in the last couple weeks, because it's students always ask, does NATO just take a vote on Article 5? Or did they even take a vote when they bombed Libya? And the answer is no. They actually don't vote. They sit around a giant table. We've been to this table. We took a tour of NATO headquarters. All the representatives of the countries basically talk it out. That's how NATO works. There is never an official vote. There is no tallying. There is no raising of hands. There's no secret ballots. The countries at the table merely sit and talk it out until the talking is done and a consensus is just reached verbally. And in which case, if France, because other people have tried to invoke Article 5, by the way. I skipped over all the times other countries have tried, mostly the United States. But if France is sitting at the table and just they say, okay, we're going to have a conversation about whether we should bomb Libya or whether the United States can invoke Article 5. France could have said, nope, we just don't believe, we do not believe that this is a proper invocation of Article 5. And that would be the end of the discussion. That would be it. So it's not necessarily a veto, it's a discussion. And, the discussion may happen, and the United States might have been going back and forth and saying, hey, Great Britain, are you on board? Yeah, we're on board. Hey, Luxembourg, you're on board? Yeah, we're on board. Greece, Italy, yeah. So you can have a conversation and come back to France and be like, really, France? Because everybody's on board. That's how it goes, though. It's a free-flowing conversation, and you just can't have anybody completely opposed to it by the end of the conversation. And then they walk out of the room and go bomb the hell out of other people. Okay, let's see. Styles says, also, the Germans built a beer garden. Of course, only my good friend Styles would know this, that the Germans built a beer garden at HQS in Kabul. General McChrystal was having none of that when he took over. He changed it to a pistol range. Oh, my God. I'm laughing because I'm sure you're telling the truth. Oh, and for those of you that are not in on the joke with me, my good friend Styles, who's in this room right now, has served time over there. Probably more than one time. So whatever he says actually happened. Okay. But during all this, so I've just now gone over the missions and the mission creep and the mission changes and the actual things that NATO has done since the end of the Cold War, since the Soviet Union went away. Now let's talk about what else was happening at this time. And what else was happening is they were growing by leaps and bounds. In an age, and this again seems mystifying to many folks at the end of the Cold War, when Soviet Union dissolved, many people said, well, that's the end of NATO. There's no reason for it. And one could argue, well, but the Soviet Union may rise again. And you also could argue, Oh, and Russia could become aggressive again. So maybe you should let NATO stick around for a little bit. Remember, the initial Dunkirk Pact between the UK and France was in 1947 after World War II was over. So you don't just disband defensive alliances or military alliances day of the end of the war. And in this case, NATO was the same thing. They're like, well, yeah, Soviet Union is gone, but Russia's still there, and Russia may re-rise. But the U.S., NATO, led by the U.S., might have taken it a little bit too far. Because here's what happened. I say a little bit too far. I don't really think so, but Russia definitely thinks so. China thinks so. A lot of other folks think NATO has gone a little too far. Not me personally, but here's what they did. As you see from the map here, they have grown considerably since the end of the Cold War. You do see the growth rates here. 1949, I told you about the original dozen, but 1952, and this is important for many other current events, 1952, Greece and Turkey were invited into NATO and joined. That becomes exceptionally important because Turkey is probably going to be the first country kicked out of NATO. You heard it here first. So 52, you see the introduction of Turkey and Greece. By 55, see if I can even determine who joined 55. Oh, Germany. West Germany joined NATO in 1955, which really irked Soviet Union. Because remember, Germany was the defeated power of World War II. Germany was the one who had attacked Soviet Union. Well, also attacked everybody else. So the United States and NATO really were pushing some buttons on not just allowing West Germany to join NATO, but by joining NATO, they were rearming West Germany. See how that's a little inflammatory to Soviet Union? So 55 is actually, if you think back to the slide I showed you about 10 hours ago, 55 is when what other organization popped up? Oh, yeah, the Warsaw Pact. Put that in the memory bank. The Warsaw Pact was created because the Soviets were pissed off about the NATO allowing West Germany to rearm and join them. Boom! There's no facts that are in isolation. Everything's related. So 55, West Germany joins. By 82, who do we have? 82, Spain joins. And Spain hadn't joined because Spain wasn't part of World War II because Spain was in a civil war killing itself for many decades. But Spain came on board. And now is when it gets interesting. 1990, East Germany reunifies with West Germany. So now East Germany and West Germany become Germany, and both Germanys are part of NATO. Boom. Okay. You still don't have the official end of Soviet Union yet. That happens in 1991. And look what happens after that. 1999, 2004, up to 2009. Now you have all the former Soviet satellite countries jumping into NATO. And I think it's probably pretty easy for you to understand why. Of particular note in this growth pattern is the former Warsaw Pact states joining NATO, basically switching sides. Now, the Cold War was over and Soviet Union had gone away, so it's not like they defected, but this was extremely unsettling to Great Soviet Union and the remnant of it, Russia. Because as you can see, Russia used to outright control all of Eastern Europe, if not outright own Eastern Europe, parts of it. And I think of particularly Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Those used to be part of Russia, basically. And not only are they no longer part of Russia territorially, they've joined NATO, the other side, a defensive pact on the other side of what was Soviet Union. So this has been exceptionally, it's mostly those Eastern European states, particularly Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, who border Russia, as well as other countries like Ukraine and Georgia who wanted to join NATO that used to be direct Soviet control that has really unsettled, really rattled Russia, even to the modern era. And by the way, I would also just show this map for 2 seconds for you to understand that NATO growth was going hand in hand with EU growth. So the European Union, another international organization, started up after World War II in order to bind the states of Europe together so that they wouldn't declare war on each other any longer. part and parcel growth of that with NATO. And both of these entities growing up to Russia's border, which has been seriously pissing off Russia basically since 1991. So Russia says, hey, dudes, in good faith, we let all these countries go free, but there was a tacit agreement that you wouldn't be encroaching back up to our borders with a defensive group who was created in order to defend it against us. So Russia has been, I say, rightly pissed off about what's called creep. NATO's eastward expansion / creep right up to Russian borders. And again, if you look at this map a little closely, you'll see that, and it's an old map too, by the way, but under consideration for EU membership is the hatchered blue one, and both Ukraine and Georgia were in negotiations. And the Bush administration was pushing very hard to get both of those countries to join NATO back in the day. However, Russia has been watching this with the Putin evil eye focused right on it. And most of this growth of NATO occurred right after the collapse of Soviet Union, when they were at their weakest. Russia was bankrupt, corrupt, desperate, loss of status, loss of territory, loss of lots of things. It couldn't really do anything besides complain about the growth of NATO. That's no longer the case. Ever since this dude took over about 20 years ago, Russia has been getting its mojo back. And while NATO continued to grow in the early years of Russia, Putin has brought Russia back to his stance of power with a spine strong enough to go ahead and stand back up to NATO expansion. And so you can see reports about this all the time. Where Russia, even back in the day, when it got back on its feet about 20 years ago and was extremely troubled by the growth of NATO countries up to its border. And again, keep this in mind. Russia used to own Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. It used to have a puppet government in control of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania. Think about this from a defensive standpoint. It controlled all of this area, owned part of it outright. And to lose all that, just from a defensive standpoint, not from a pride standpoint, to lose that territory means now you're defending, your fence used to be over there. Now your fence is right here, and your enemies are coming up to your fence. Enemies that have nuclear weapons. Enemies that are in a club called NATO, that NATO troops could be stationed in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that missiles could be pointed at you from Poland. And Poland, and especially Estonia, a fair shake closer to Moscow than, say, the United States is. So I'm only explaining this to you not because I'm saying, oh, NATO did this bad thing. I want you to understand in today's world, Russia is exceptionally wary and mistrustful of the West, more so than it ever was probably during the damn Cold War. Because now NATO is closer to Russia than ever before, with way more armaments and firepower than they even had back in the Cold War. There's a reason why Russia worries about this. And so Vladimir Putin's Russia has been watching all of this, and you can see this all the time. You may say rogue Russian jet buzzes off the coast of Finland, or Russian jet off the coast of Alaska. Russia does this stuff all the time to test NATO preparedness, and basically it's a time trial. If we do this, how quickly will they respond? If we do that, will they respond at all? If we go over here, will they do something? So this is now a high-stakes game being played much more subtly. It's a huge game of risk at the global level between the old Cold War adversaries, but without it even remotely getting hot. Everybody tests each other's capacities all the time. And because Putin's Russia is extremely mistrustful of the West and NATO encroachment, they have been ramping their military right back up to Cold War levels. In fact, some would say past Cold War levels. Russia keeps building these crazy new weapons, like these supersonic high-speed missiles, and they now have the biggest, I just call it TNT. Russia has the biggest explosive weapon that's not atomic. So there's atomic and there's nuclear. We all know what they can do. Russia has the biggest non-atomic or non-nuclear weapon that can, I guess, blow up a damn city, but without all the radiation. And they do war games all the time. Russia's been taking over the Arctic, something I reported back 15 years ago in my first edition of Plaid Avengers World. You see right there, Russia planted a flag on the bottom of the Arctic Sea. I love it. I love it. You can't make this shit up. Because Russia's been taking over the Arctic, doing a territorial claim on the Arctic to increase its fence, to push its fence back, to be able to push its defensive and offensive capabilities back against an encroaching NATO. So you see these types of things all the time, and this is actually still in the news today. The United States is still working on a missile defense shield with its NATO allies. I haven't heard about much about this recently, so I'm not even sure where it's going. But the missile defense shield infuriates Russia. They feel like they're being encroached. And at times past, the United States has put missile defense stuff, mostly radar detection stuff, in Poland, even in Romania, places that are closer to the Soviet Union. Closer to Russia, which always ticks Russia off. Putin attends military drills that worry Russia's neighbors. That was something from several years ago, like 2 years ago. They had a huge war games thing going on with Russia. Belarus attended. Some other Soviet allies attended that military exercise as well. And the name of the exercise was, let's pretend Western Europe invades Russia. Here's what we'll do. So they're not making any bones about it. And Putin has been pushing back with more than just military drills. As I suggested earlier, both Ukraine and Georgia were in negotiation talks with NATO. And I actually distinctly remember Dick Cheney, the then vice president, went over to Georgia and Ukraine multiple times. He was pushing hard to get Ukraine to hurry up and sign up to join NATO. But it was right at the point that Russia was getting its bearings back and starting to push back. And it was near the end of the Bush-Cheney years. So that's why Cheney was pushing it so hard. But it never came to fruition. I bet Ukraine wishes now that it had joined NATO because, as you might know, in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and took back the Crimean Peninsula. Even before that, in the lower right corner, you see in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. Just invaded it under a lot of context of protecting Russian citizens that I won't get into here. The point is that Russia, under a newfound strong leader, has been pushing back against NATO and intentionally has made military maneuvers against Georgia and Ukraine, two countries that were trying to get into NATO. It's not a coincidence. Putin has also formed something called the Eurasian Union. That's right. Somebody asked about that at the beginning of this. The Eurasian Union is Putin's attempt to kind of rebuild the remnants of great Soviet Union in order to, again, counter and push back against what it sees as offensive threats, military threats against its territory. Russia lives in perpetual paralyzing fear of territorial encroachment. Just perpetual. It's the one thing above all things that has guided Russian foreign policy since there was a Russia 500 years ago. They're always worried about invasion, always worried about the borders, always worried about the territory. So if you know that about Russian history, perhaps it helps make sense why Putin's Russia looks at NATO and saying, of course you guys are encircling us. Of course you're going to invade us. Of course you are. There's no other reason you would do these things. The Cold War is over. Why the hell's NATO growing? It's gotten bigger since the reason d'etre went away. So they've been rightly confused about this, and it's not over yet. These are two stories from the last week that Russia says U.S. allies building up forces near Belarusian border. The dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, accused NATO of hatching aggressive plans on Belarus. And Russia's defense chief today highlighted tensions with borders along NATO countries. That's all from the last week. Is there a question? Question. Let's see. Small Booty says, Russia's fear of the West legitimate in modern times, I mean historically.
Is Russia's fear?
Yes. Is Russia's fear of West legitimate? Well, being from the Western side, and now we're just getting into, personal opinion. But as someone from Team West who lives here in the United States, it's hard to envision a world in which the United States wants to take over Russia. It's just, it's almost incomprehensible. And it's equally incomprehensible that Ukraine is going to try to take over parts of Russia, or that Latvia is going to try to take over parts of Russia. It's incomprehensible. Those are small states who couldn't do it. And the United States is a big state that could do it, but it's not there and doesn't want it. So the United States and NATO's main mission, to me, I think it's pretty genuine when they say, yeah, we're worried about Russia. Remember, we formed NATO so that Russia couldn't gobble up smaller states, or Soviet Union couldn't gobble up smaller states. That same principle applies. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are very small states, and they couldn't wait to get into NATO. That was them. NATO didn't go and say, hey, we're going to take you over. They became independent and begged to be let into NATO immediately because in their mind, of course, Russia's going to become powerful again. It's the ebb and flow of history, man. Of course, Soviet Union will dust itself off. Russia will become strong again, and it has. And given today's Putin-esque world, if Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had not joined NATO, what do you think the odds are that Putin would have already invaded them and taken them back over? To me, it's pretty likely. It's not even really, this is conjecture. You know, we're armchair quarterbacking here. But given Russia's movements in both Ukraine and Georgia, I can't imagine why they would have not fabricated some altercation in Estonia. And by the way, this could be a whole nother lecture because I love this lecture of the way Putin's been taking Russia for the last 15 years specifically. Putin has been changing his terminology and saying, hey, I'm the president of Russia. I'm here to protect Russia. He changed from that to, I am the president of Russia. I am here to protect all Russians on planet Earth. That was a distinct change that was made about 5 years ago. And the words are important. Putin saying, I'm here to protect Russians means that if there are Russian people in Kazakhstan or Estonia or Latvia or Ukraine, which there are, then he's giving himself the right to go protect them. And so I can't help but be a futurist / armchair quarterback and say, yeah, had Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania not joined NATO and been under the NATO umbrella, that Putin knows he would be attacking NATO if he invaded Estonia. If not for that, they would have had an incident already in Estonia where some ethnic Russians were beat up or picked on or killed by some nationalist Estonians, and then Russia would send in forces to go protect those Russian ethnic Russians, and then would just end up taking over the country. That's pretty much what they were doing in Georgia. That's pretty much what exactly their game plan of how they took over Crimean Peninsula. So, again, it's conjecture, but it's based on logic. And logic says a reinvigorated, powerful Putin's Russia would certainly have treaded back in and taken some of these territories back that they believe are rightfully theirs. So from a Western perspective, does the West want to take Russian territory? No. What the hell do we want it for? But does Russia want to take back parts of Eastern Europe that it used to control outright? That seems logical. That seems entirely logical. And NATO is now the defense that pushes back on Putin's Russia to not allow them to take over Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and other places anymore. That's why Belarus is such an important situation right now with the popular demonstrations against their dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. Because if he goes away, if Belarus becomes an actual democracy, Belarus might want to join the EU. Belarus might want to join NATO. See how this goes here? Belarus might say, hey, we're in mortal fear of Russia reabsorbing us, which they should be, by the way, because Russia probably will reabsorb Belarus. So they want to get under that. Some Belarusians would like to get under that umbrella as well, one would think, to maintain their sovereign state. But I swore it would be a half hour. Here we are again at an hour and a half. I always flip it somehow. Ken hit me back up. Moscow's Fear of the West is based on the perception that we allowed the Germans to bleed them while we slowly fought across the African desert. They want to buffer again like the Warsaw Pact provided. Boom, I agree. I totally agree. Russia wants Eastern Europe back in order to be a buffer state. Although, what are they buffering from? NATO. So, and all those countries are already NATO countries. So that's why Ukraine is Ukraine and Belarus, the Russians will not let them go. The Russians will not let those two states go to NATO. I actually believe they would fully invade first. Because from a Russian perspective, if you think about it, it would be better to go ahead and piss off NATO and piss off the world and piss off the UN and piss off Ukraine and piss off Belarus. It would be better to piss all of them off and go ahead and invade Ukraine right now. Just invade Ukraine and take it over before they get into NATO. Because if Russia invades Ukraine right now, it's Russia versus the Ukraine. And that puts the impetus on the United States or other entities to come get involved in what would become a world war just to save Ukraine. And Russia calculates, I think correctly, that they wouldn't do that. The United States is not going to get into a war to protect Belarus. They thought about it with Ukraine, but they still haven't done much with helping Ukraine. So it would be better to preemptively take it back now, because if Ukraine gets into NATO, okay, now if you invade Ukraine, now you're up against the whole NATO force. So that's where it gets tricky and why Russia will likely never allow those states, nor Georgia or any other states in the Caucasus, to join NATO. But speaking of which, let's finish up with NATO today, NATO back in the news, and NATO's future. NATO's been back in the news for different reasons here recently, as we all well know in the last 4 years. When Donald Trump came to office, he specifically does not like international organizations. Again, not a judgment call. He doesn't like them. I think you asked him, he'd tell you straight up. He is of the opinion, America first. America is doing most of the heavy lifting militarily for NATO and in the world. Why the hell do I need to be part of a group? There's a certain logic to that too. He mostly was complaining that the United States pays a lot of money in order to protect all these other European states. All other NATO members are getting a free ride on the back of the United States, according to Donald Trump, because they don't contribute as much as the United States does. Again, there's a certain logic to that as well. The United States military is the biggest on planet Earth, period. And it has been and it will be for some time to come. So my only flaw with Trump's argument is the United States already has the most gigantic military on planet Earth. It's not gigantic because it's helping NATO. It would be gigantic either way. Yes, the smaller European states are getting a bit of a free ride. But what Donald Trump proposed, and is actually starting to happen, is his administration said, look, dudes, everybody's got to pony up on a more equal basis. And the best way we can think of that it's equal for NATO is that everybody gives at least 2% of your GDP goes to military spending, which in translation is for NATO spending. Because remember, there's no NATO weapons, there's no NATO troops. It's that each country has to have their stuff ready to go. And so like Luxembourg, they don't spend crap. They don't even have a military. So Donald Trump's saying, hey, okay, well, you need to spend at least 2% of your GDP in some way, shape, or form to help with NATO preparedness and readiness. And you can see on this map over here, defense spending by NATO countries in Europe as percentage of GDP. 2% and above is in the darkest green. And I do want to stop here for a moment to let you examine that. Look at that. Isn't that interesting? Which countries in Europe are spending 2% and more or above on defense spending? Look at it. Well, there's the UK over there. We got them. They're a big power. Do you detect a pattern yet? It's every country that borders Russia. Surprise! Of course, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Poland, and Romania are like, oh, no. Hold on, Donnie. Hold on, NATO. We're spending our 2% because we like being in this club because we're on the border with the country we fear the most, which is Russia. All right? Now, again, back to my only picking on Trump's flaw in his reasoning of the U.S. pays so much money. The U.S. has the most giant military on planet Earth, and it would whether there was a NATO or not. I always love pointing out these graphics. This is military spending way back 6 years ago, 2014. The United States pretty much spends more than the next 10 countries put together on defense. Now, the question is, does the United States spend more on defense because of NATO? And that I do not have an answer for. I don't know that the Trump administration does either, because if they disbanded NATO, my instinct is the U.S. would probably spend even more money. That's the thing about being a leader of a team, is you can rely on the team. The team may not contribute as much as you do, but hey, they got weapons and guns and people and lots of other places that we can rely on. So the United States, $580 billion in military spending. Even China was at a paltry 150 back in the day, and it's actually not changed any. This is a 2020 map of it. It's a bubble map that just shows numbers in billions of dollars. The bigger the bubble, the bigger the spending. 610 for the United States. China's up over 200,000 or 216 billion at this point. Russia actually only at 84, but there's only so much they could spend money on because they're still kind of broke. So the United States has been, is, and will be the biggest spender on defense, regardless of the future of NATO. And let's talk about that now, because I am quite intrigued on where NATO's going to go next. Again, if you followed the logic of why it was formed, it should have disbanded in 1991. But instead, it almost doubled in size. Now you know some of the reasons why. To push back and contain Russia before it got back on its feet again. I think it's safe to say the U.S. and NATO knew what they were doing. Like, well, we should take advantage of the situation that Russia is down and out right now and help free up some of these Eastern European states that want to be democracies and want to join the EU and want to be capitalist. Hey, that's our ideology, and that ideology won the Cold War, so why wouldn't you continue to perpetrate and spread it more? So that's exactly what happened. Russia's now pushing back, so you're probably not going to see much growth in NATO over in Europe anymore. By the way, the most recent inductee was Montenegro just this year. So people have already forgotten. No. There was only 29 NATO members up for about a decade, or no, 2015. I have to go back and look at the map. But yeah, it's still growing because Macedonia just joined. And there are other Balkan states who are on the list to join. They might get entry, maybe. Yeah, they probably will get in if they want to get in. But the bigger states like Ukraine, Georgia, the Caucasus, Belarus, probably not. We're probably looking at a dead end there. We're back at a stalemate between NATO and what's left of the Russian Empire over in Eastern Europe. However, I'm more intrigued that the NATO group has worldwide function as well. I already talked about patrolling off the Horn of Somalia, and they've done actions in retraining actions in Iraq to help support troops of Western nations doing things in other places. But it's more that its mission is going to change. It has to. There is no more Soviet Union. And even if you believe Russia is the new Soviet Union, there is now a stalemate in Eastern Europe. So Russia's not going to grow that way unless they invade Estonia, in which case it's Article 5. So you're at a kind of a stopgap there. Nothing else is going to happen there. And their defensive strategies and their defensive training and military maneuvers, all that's going to continue as well to help keep Russia in check. However, by the way, I'm saying this, I know I'm an American, so I don't want anybody to think that I'm anti-Russia. And if you're a Russian, it's like, oh, see, I knew it. He's saying to keep Russia in check. And I'm like, it's not me. I'm not a military guy. I'm just saying, yeah, that's why they do these things. So NATO definitely does these drills and lots of things that irk Russia. Russia does lots of drills that irk NATO. They go back and forth. But I believe that's a stalemate up there. The mission's got to change, and I think it is changing in other places. And here's some headlines that I just pulled from this week that I thought, wow, okay, that's interesting. Amid France-Turkey row, and this is from literally 2 hours ago, amid the French-Turkish row right now, UK calls on NATO allies to defend free speech. What? How is that feasible? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch yesterday's podcast where I just talked for 2.5 hours about the Turkish Recep Erdogan's move as head of Turkey to call for a worldwide boycott against French goods because he's so pissed off at France. And France was standing up for free speech, and that's why the whole fracas is going on right now. So the Brits calling for NATO to somehow help. And now we're getting back into it. Team West. Oh, so is Team West. Is NATO going to become a natural extension of Team West civilization? Remember, I told you to remember that quote at the very first or second slide. Defending, a territorial defending of common cultures and civilizations. I think we're starting to get back to defending a civilization. So a call to protect free speech. The other one up here, NATO delivers ventilators to the Czech Republic. What the hell's that got to do with defense? That's actually providing a service. It's almost like NATO's turning into a national guard during the pandemic, helping move medical stuff around to its member states. I'm not making fun of it. I'm just saying this is different. And most NATO countries have said that they're going to step up to Donald Trump's gold standard of funding for NATO because they're seeing this mission move in different directions now. And this has nothing to do with anything, but I just pulled it up today. Piracy is on the rise, and coronavirus could make it worse as this pandemic continues to decimate the world economy. People get more desperate. Criminal activity increases. So you could see NATO called back into action in order to help secure sea lanes in different places. And in fact, I'm going to suggest NATO is going to get called up quite quickly to protect some sea lanes in a very specific place, the Eastern Mediterranean. How the U.S. plans to keep the peace between Greece and Turkey and watch Russia simultaneously. My friends, NATO is not going anywhere, but it's going to continue to change its mission to remain active in today's world that calls for different things. We are no longer that worried that Great Soviet Union is going to take over planet Earth, nor even that it's going to take over Europe. We are much more worried about other things. NATO countries are much more worried about other things. And I just brought up this clash between Turkey and France over free speech. There's been an outright clash happening between Greece and Turkey over who controls waters of the Eastern Mediterranean. Both of these countries are NATO members. Wow, crap. What's going to happen there if Greece and Turkey bump into each other in competing claims of territorial waters, which they're starting to do, and both of them invoke Article 5? Ugh, we're not really, that's never happened. Who? Oh, geez. Okay. Oh, do we have a Russian hacker?
They're just like, buy followers or something like that.
Buy followers? What?
Want to come buy followers, private views.
Oh, I thought it was somebody. I thought maybe I'd offended a Russian.
Yeah, they're all just followers.
Yeah, so watch. You heard it here first. NATO's going to become much more implicitly involved in the coming conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean between Turkey and everybody, but specifically between Turkey and Greece over these disputed waters. And that brings me to the last, which is, what is the future of NATO's members? Are we done? Is 30 it? 30 seems like a nice number. Well, I've suggested maybe some of the few other Balkan states, former Yugoslavian states, which are not NATO, may join. But Turkey's the one I'm really worried about, and I'm not the only one. Perhaps it's time to refresh the roster. This graphic is showing you favorable impressions of NATO. And the darker the color, the higher the favorable rating. Still above 50% in the United States, despite Donald Trump's not liking the organization very much. The one to look at is that Turkey is at a paltry 20%. Less than a fifth of its population thinks it should even be in NATO. This is coming at a time that Turkey is having territorial conflict with Greece, having a cultural conflict with France, has bashed the United States, has bashed the European Union, and you have to start asking at some point, oh, and by the way, and Turkey's getting involved in so many other possible conflicts that NATO is rightfully worried, hey, wait a minute, Turkey, you're getting into too many fights, and if you get into a scrap, with Saudi Arabia, we're not getting involved in that. So to me, it looks like the beginning of the end for Turkish membership, and they've never kicked a member out. So we don't even know if it's possible. We don't know if it's probable. I think it is. But just earlier today, several U.S. military folks came out and said, no, we love Turkey. We've got air bases in Turkey. Turkey is an operational gold mine for us. We have to have a presence in Turkey for all our operations in the Middle East. So the United States doesn't want Turkey to go away, but it seems like we're quickly getting to a point that they may have to go because there's no cultural cohesion between Turkey and the rest of the NATO members, not just because they're Muslim. Turkey's going its own way quite intentionally, and its own way is the opposite way of Team West. So Turkey's movements away from the West and making fun of the West and getting in conflicts with the West make it exceptionally problematic for Turkey to stay in NATO. And only 20% of Turks even want to be in there anyway. So it's like, I wonder if something's going to change there. And I'll end on the Quad. I believe you're going to see Turkey be uninvited to NATO fairly soon, but that might make room for a new group on the block. We call it the Quad. So as NATO perhaps expands its mission in different places, and the world has changed. There is no Soviet Union. There's no worry about a threat from communist Soviet Union anymore. But what country is getting much more powerful and is starting to cause concern for folks? And it actually has the word communist in it. That's communist China, although they're not communist. So China, to me, if you want the quick assessment, China is the new Soviet Union threat. China is expanding outward. China is creating friction between it and other states, other sovereign states it may want to take over, other sovereign states it may want to make into a puppet. So the same scenario that played out with the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, in my mind, and many others, is starting to play out between China and its immediate neighborhood as well. And again, this might piss off Chinese nationalists and pro-China people. I'm not saying anything against China. China is a newfound world power. It is projecting its power outward as world powers do. However, it's going to be projecting its power up against democratic states like Japan, South Korea. There's the Taiwan issue that I don't even want to get into here because I talked about it for a week. And it looks like the Quad is this grouping of the United States, Australia, India, and Japan, for democracies, for big economy democracies that are almost natural allies and kind of have been natural allies anyway. And I've always asked the question, maybe not so much India, but can you imagine a world in which Japan is attacked that the United States does not help? Can you imagine a scenario that Australia is attacked and the United States does not come to their aid? So isn't Australia and Japan kind of in NATO already? Why doesn't NATO just go ahead and take them? Why don't you just go ahead and add Japan, Australia, maybe New Zealand, maybe Singapore, maybe Indonesia, maybe India? Add them into NATO because they are all democracies. And now we're getting back to a common culture / civilizational attitude about what NATO is all about, to protect a common culture and civilization. Democracy seems like was one of the cores of NATO from the get-go. What's wrong with expanding the team to a new part of the world where there is a greater threat of expansionism from a rising power that may not be that friendly to democracies in and around its periphery? And that would be China. Again, not trying to offend Chinese people. This is already underway. There's already, the Quad is what they call them, the four. I've already reported on this on a couple other podcasts already, but the United States, Mike Pompeo just got back from India, where he was there for several days, and they cemented a historic defense agreement. It was mostly an information sharing agreement, but it's still historic because the U.S. has never done anything with India, and it's just now starting to. And the United States and Japan started joint military exercises last week as well, which is a standard operating procedure. They're doing it already. The United States and Australia are doing joint military exercises. The United States, Australia, and India are going to start doing joint military exercises in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So This, and I love that this story down here, the lower one on foreign policy, that says India doesn't need the Quad to counter China. I love the little quote there. It says, many proponents of the Quad consider it a fledgling alliance with the potential to form the nucleus of an Asian NATO to contain China, much the way Europe NATO was formed up to contain Soviet Union. That's all I wanted to talk about tonight. That's what I think the future is. I think that, I love these graphics I put together here. NATO's future is NATO plus the Quad for a league of democracy that spans the nation's oceans. That spans the Earth's oceans. And that's all I've got to say about that. Now I'll take any questions that anybody might have. Let's see. Back to Styles, who said Ukraine has what was major Soviet shipyards, the Soviet carrier. Yes. Another impetus for the Russians to take back over Ukraine, especially the Crimean Peninsula, is that Russia's Navy's always been in the Crimean Peninsula and was even after it turned into Ukraine. So it was, again, I get it. I empathize with all sides. I empathize with sides that I'm even seemingly poking fun at or that I'm saying are threatening. It's like, no, I'm not making fun of China. China's expanding its power outward. Unfortunately, that might mean that it gets into a scrap with Japan at some point. So Japan's allies will probably want to join Japan to join NATO. Let's see. Woogie Boogie says that's why the Russians keep troops in Moldova. That's right. Locks that down, that land route to Moscow. Good call, Woogie Boogie. Moldova will be the next one that gets incorporated back into Soviet Russia outright, or will join their league, the little SCO. Not SEO, the Eurasian Union. Russia will probably pressure them into joining the Eurasian Union soon, and probably some sort of defense pact as well. Let's see. So Callisto pointed out that there was a bot that jumped into the room. Gotcha, okay. Let's see. Styles says the 100-year marathon lays out China's plan. Yeah, China does have... too bad, Ken, that you missed the whole lectures I did last week. Was all about China projecting its power outward. So I already talked about that for 8 hours. Otherwise, I'd chat with you some more about it. And also, Captain Ron plot going to be on the test. Let's see. CHSHO13 says, Professor, should NASA get the same budget as the U.S. military? Holy cow. If NASA got the same budget as the U.S. military, we'd already own Mars. Or at least we would have blown it up. And Vikram Tawari back in the hizzle. Welcome back, Vikram says, could you please upload the podcast on YouTube as well? That's a Katie question. I'm sure she could do that.
I went to do it before I got here, and it was like 3 hours. And I was like, I didn't want to do it while
gotcha.
So yeah, we will. I'm ready.
Oh, you know about the last lecture?
The ones you just did this week.
Okay. Yeah, Vikram, they'll be up, but they take a while to get up there.
Like 3 gigs.
Constant Questioning says hospitals should get part of that budget. Yeah, the U.S. defense budget, it is significant, and the funny thing is after the Cold War was over, one would have thought, well, yeah, much like NATO, the Cold War is over, so defense spending should be reeled in. No, it's only got bigger. And for a while there, I was kind of on the liberal side of that argument, saying, hey, dudes, what's up? Come on. Cold War is over. You don't need to spend this much money on all these weapons. We should do stuff, to help the country. Or I'm a big fan of NASA, too. I'm like, give it all to NASA. Let them go own the moon. Or let's build a space colony. However, in these trying times, I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but defense spending is likely to continue to go up no matter who wins the election next week. I mean, President Trump has already increased defense spending and has promised to do more. I think even if Biden wins, you have to look at what's going on around the world. And so you do have an increasingly assertive and aggressive China that's, again, starting to rub elbows with a lot of U.S. allies. China wants to take over the South China Sea. And every president for the last 3 presidents has increased U.S. patrols of the South China Sea and airspace around Japan and in the South China Sea to prevent China from outright claiming it and taking it over. That's not going to stop either. Now you've got the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean and a host of other issues that are cropping up with the world pandemic affecting the world economy. That's, again, going to and has been and will continue to cause disruption in supply chain stuff, but also create instability and free movement of goods and services on the oceans. So you just start to stack up today's problems that honestly weren't that big a deal 20 years ago. They're becoming a much bigger deal now than they were. So there was a time and place for the U.S. to slow down its defense spending, but it ain't now. And again, that's not a judge. I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying that's what the U.S. thinks, because you're seeing it start to uptick now again. Let's see. CVNs equal 4.5 acres of sovereign U.S. territory anytime, anywhere. I'm not even sure what that means, but I like it. CVNs? Cool. Are there any other questions about any other things? I do podcast Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at this time. We have gone for another 2 hours when I could have swore it was going to be 30 minutes. Hopefully this is okay. Did anybody like this at all? Do you like this format? Did you like the content? Did you learn anything new? I know many of you probably knew some stuff about NATO, but maybe you didn't know all this stuff. Is it helpful to your life at all? And what would you like me to talk about next week? I am going to do a podcast on Friday. Friday's more of a World Week in Review or a news summary. I actually might retitle that, actually, Katie, into Good News Friday. Good Friday with news. I think I'm going to do a Good News Friday podcast that just says, hey, here are some positive, interesting things that are going on planet Earth between states or with technologies or things of that nature. Oh, I got some comments here. Vikram says, yes, please. More knowledge, the better. Style said he'll sleep better tonight. I'm sure the painkillers and the scotch won't hurt. Jakob's back in the house. I didn't see Jakob comment earlier. Is it possible to move one for the Wednesday or Monday podcast to Friday? I actually have time conflict on these 2 days. Like I just said, Jakob, I'm going to do a Good News Friday. At least I'll start it on this Friday and see how you guys like it. And we'll do it a little bit earlier in the day. The Friday podcast we were doing at 3? 2:33. Just because Friday night, I'm getting worn out. I can only do so many of these this late at night. Lunch happy hour, late lunch happy hour, late lunch martini, good news happy hour Friday. Just take whatever combination of those verbs and nouns and adjectives you like, and we'll do it. Constant Questioning says, yeah, that'd be great. And Vikram says you should do more like Vice News, latest news, and current events. Well, I try to do latest news. I try to, Vikram, just so everybody knows, when I do these hour, 2 hour, 3 hour podcast, they're usually incited by something I've seen in the news. But then I always try to give more of a background. And I end up having more fun talking about the background because I want people to understand things better. I want you to have a deeper understanding of what's going on as opposed to, oh yeah, well, I heard they blew up some shit in Azerbaijan today. It's like, well, that's nice, but you don't know why or what that means for you at home. So that's why we continue to do stuff like that. And I'm going to continue to push the format in this direction, even if we gain no followers, even if we gain no likes, even if we gain no subscribers, which Katie is probably getting ready to remind me, hey, can you all subscribe and like me and love me and click on me and follow me and whatever the hell else, whatever the hell you young people do nowadays. So we're going to figure out some cool prizes or emotes or whatever you get for...
You already put the post of the Putin one earlier when you popped his head up.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And we're going to get the Plaid Avenger artist, Klaus, is going to make us some more emotes. So if you have any suggestions for emotes, I didn't even know what the hell emote was until like 2 days ago. I just call it an icon. So if you have any suggestions for emotes that would tease you into becoming a subscriber, that would be great. I want a NATO emote. Can we just do flags? Can we do a NATO flag?
Yeah, they actually have flags already.
Will they look? I mean,
I'm sure they have NATO ones.
I want a NATO flag. Damn it.
Yeah, should be easy.
An Erdogan emote. I believe we already had we have an Erdogan head.
Yeah, I just don't know if I should do any more because it said political figures.
Somebody told us you're not supposed to do political emotes, but I say just grab our Recep Erdogan emote and just call it Recep. Just do first name. You could have done Vladimir for Putin.
Yeah.
We're definitely not going to try to do Trump. That would be tracked down too quickly. All right, Small Booty, we're going to get you a Regep. A Regep icon, emote is coming for sure. Okay, well, that's all for me for tonight then. I really like this. I hope that you all like it too. Oh, wait a minute. I'm supposed to go like this. Let me go full screen. Let me get real. Let me get real for a minute. Oh, we go. I really like doing these things. I hope you enjoy them too. And any suggestions for emotes, but also for future content. I've debated about doing whole lectures, but like 1 hour at a time. So I might start next week just doing a whole lecture about Russia that I used to do live in class, but literally 1 hour at a time because it's like a 4-hour lecture. That might be what we do. I think we go ahead and put Russia on the docket for next week. I'll just start lecturing about Russia on Monday. We'll have the Good News Friday podcast, but then we'll... I just saw that from Yakov. Yeah. I'm sure we can do actually do Xi Jinping as a Winnie the Pooh. Oh yeah, that'll get the Chinese hot and bothered on us quickly. Yeah, I think I'm going to do a whole lecture on Russia starting Monday. I haven't done it for ages, so I got to dust it off and see what's up. So when I do a lecture for World Regions class, I'm assuming most of you have taken my class. But hopefully we're getting new viewers who have no clue who I am. So I've lectured for 20 years about different parts of the world. It's called World Regional Geography. And I don't even care about the geography part. It's more like, no, I'm going to teach you about what's going on here. So when I do a lecture about a region, I start at the start. So I'll probably talk about physical geography of Russia for the first half hour. Then we'll start to get into some history and then get into politics and economics and current events and lead it all up to today's world, which takes some time. But yeah, I think I want to do Russia. I think we're going to do it. We'll do Good News Friday. Cool. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you like this. Oh, a hokey emote. That's probably licensed and trademarked too, though, wouldn't it be? Somebody just said a hokey emote.
Yeah, I wonder how it is.
Yeah.
Silly.
And I saw that CHSH who said we need a podcast about space competition then and now. Yeah, I would love to do that too. Maybe doing the Russia lecture will entice me, will motivate me, will be a catalyst to do something just on space. Mostly because I don't know. I know some history, but I don't know exactly what's going on everywhere with space stuff, and I'd love to. So if you all have any recommendations of things to read, articles to read, if you want to help me build a script, I would love that. Hit me up at joboyer@vt.edu anytime, especially if you become a subscriber. I'll mail you one of these. Oh, look at that. Oh, let me see if I can do it. Look at that. It's a head on a body. Cool. Yeah, if you become a subscriber or you help me out with a script, I'll send you some Plat Avenger swag as well. But I need to get out of here and go eat breakfast. I got the COVIDs. The COVIDs need tending to. Let's get on this. Get some drinks. Get some popcorn. Hit the couch. You guys have a great evening. I'm going to take the day off tomorrow. And we'll see you on Friday for Good News Friday. Otherwise, we'll see you starting next week, Monday at 8 p.m. for Russia. Then and now. For now, as always, party on.